Hi, welcome. I'm Dave Essinger, General Editor of the AWP Intro Journals Project. The Intro Journals Project has been around for years and years, but this is the first year that we thought we could do a virtual reading of our Journals Project winners because we can. If you're not familiar with the Intro Journals Project, this contest invites nominations from AWP member programs every fall for student work in poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. Winners are placed for publication in prominent journals, including this year the Colorado Review, Puerto del Sol, Reed Magazine, Tampa Review, Hayden's Ferry Review, Mid-American Review, Iron Horse Literary Review, and Quarterly West. This year's judges were Karen Craigo for poetry, Athena Dixon in creative nonfiction, and Mary Grimm in fiction. Tonight's reading, we'll hear from 5 of this year's winning poets, J.P. Grasser, Skye Jackson, Nathaniel Ricketts, Sydney Vogl, and Cassandra Caverhill. And would like to thank all of the participating journals and all of the AWP staff, including Director of Publications, Supriya Bhatnagar. Thanks for putting all these together, Supriya, and Marketing Coordinator, Miranda Gonzalez, and Director of Communications, Juanita Lester, who's doing our recording today, too. So if we can jump into some readings here. Nathaniel, this is all you. Let's see. And this will be, this is What's Inside, right?
Yeah, I thought JP mentioned that he was going first if he has time constraints, but...
yes. No, you know what? My screen scrolled on me. JP has stuff to do. Let's do JP first. How about that? So JP, you're at the University of Utah Creative Writing Program, and this is Autotomy, which is coming out soon from the Colorado Review, yes?
Yep, that's correct.
Cool. All yours.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not sure how to pronounce it either. It's definitely Greek. Autotomy is how I've pronounced it, not to be confused with autonomy. Nomos, obviously, is right, Greek for law, and this is tomos for severance. So it means self-severance in Greek. Autotomy. If their tails really did grow back, we never saw. Having by then returned the skinks and race runners to their burrows and wind-furrowed dunes. This was Nebraska, summertime, a whole world removed from this less obvious one. Field pivots orbiting nothing, clouds of gnats coalescing into gaseous planets. Hell, even the radio was somehow plainer out there. At the top of the hour, a gruff voice rattled through futures and the price per bushel of soybeans. A voice perfectly at ease with the sort of dull machinery that swallows people whole. What I meant to prove was a mind full of purpose and a head for precision. So I caught the lizards and cut their tails off with a hacksaw while my cousins shrieked with glee. I'd read Lear by then, which was part of the problem, part of the part of myself I was trying to lop off for good. That flamboyant precocity, that ache, that taste for beauty in all its irrevocable ache and complexity. As flies to wanton boys. Would you believe I thought of the line as I held a severed tail up to the light, inspecting the scales overlay, that impossible geometry? What matter if you don't? That's the truth. Together, sometimes we chased the girls with the bloody limp tails, but when I was alone, I sat by the bank and held sun-hot stones to my chest and prayed to the god of lucid skies who put calligraphy on the face of the water, and below it, light that quakes and warps in ribbons, who cast glittering archipelagos across the marble floors of commerce, who mold the viscous light of winter afternoons, who even honed the sliver of light that cut my grandmother in half her last morning. Her gray tongue flicked at the ice chips, and her mouth opened and closed by reflex, and I will never forget it. What I wanted was to be unformed, to be stripped naked and devolve back to that time before my parts made me unwhole, before death was withstood, let alone taken lying down. Some days I walked around all afternoon with a cleft tail in my pocket, calling it talisman, calling it clever fiction in the selfsame breath. I knew myself a coward, but I thought self-severance was a way of being brave and smart at once, another genius trick of evolution. Turns out they mostly die, and if they are made whole again, their tails grow back discolored, stubby, and dull, so they're cast out anyway. Imbricated light of days, I may many times have been an engine of cruelty, but let them never say I was no student of the light. I was. I apprenticed myself to the light and saw it break on everything. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, JP. We have a couple minutes for Q&A if anybody has any questions for JP. I thought I'd just open that up. Anything you'd like to tell us about kind of like backstory for this poem? Any of the like experiences that gave us some of these images?
Sure. I mean, I think that a lot of us probably agree that poems, in particular, kind of inhabit this space. I mean, Keats calls it negative capability. I call it doubt. I mean, the space between two poles and between opposites. Biographically, I am from both, a sort of ritzy suburb of DC and a fish farm in Nebraska. And I, didn't belong in either of those places. At the same time, I've been really working through queer ecology and what it would mean to, what it meant for me back then, kind of almost before understanding gender and gender roles and all these things that we take to be like solidified, or that we're starting to begin, many more people are beginning to understand aren't solid, that they're constructed. And, back then these things didn't sort of, it never occurred to me other than here I behave one way and there I behave another way. And, but there was always a kind of dissonance that is fertile ground for a poem, if nothing else. So I think that a lot of people probably feel that that's where the poetry begins. So,
yeah, thanks. Anything else you'd like to tell us about other projects, other things you're working on, stuff you have in the works, places we should look for your work soon?
No.
Understand.
I'm keeping it close to my chest, Dave. Sorry.
Well, thanks, JP. Anybody else? Here's your chance to ask JP. Yeah, what do you think, Skye?
JP, my question is how old were you when you had that memory, that experience with the lizard? I'm just kind of curious about the age of the speaker.
It's it was probably like 10 summers in a row. It was probably between like 8 and 16 or so. I mean, it was like this long, which in memory is just like devolved into one fluid thing, So sorry for the non-answer answer.
No, I was just asking.
Had to get a poem out of that, right? Yeah.
Right. I was just asking because of like the fragility of the speaker, and so I was really curious about that, using the tail as kind of like this talisman, and like it seems like such a childlike thing to do. And so I just had that question.
I don't know. I think maybe one definition of age is just getting better at hiding our fragilities.
True. I concur.
Yep.
Good one. Well, yeah, thanks, JP. Hey, Skye, this looks like you up next. You ready? This will
Yeah.
be your piece of Which One? And this will be coming out from Read Magazine.
Yes.
So, yeah, all you.
Okay, awesome. This poem is called Which One? And it begins with this epigraph, which is a quote from the Washington Post. It is very uncommon for young Black men to commit suicide, let alone by hanging. Raymond Winbush. I hid the gun when my father told me to. My little brother told my parents twice what he planned to do. They were alarmed. After all, their oldest son had chosen rope instead. His body bent limp into dangled bloat, the brown skin around his neck peeled off into strips. They tell me suicides always leave a note, but my brother, who often wrote and always drew, somehow forgot as he slipped down into the noose. As I tucked the gun away in my dresser and buried it under stacks of clothes like a gift hidden away to surprise a friend, I heard my father's voice. Your brother's dead, breaking cool like ice that August night. And I couldn't bear to ask him which one.
That was intense, Skye.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, great. Yeah, would you care to give us some backstory, some understanding of this poem?
Sure.
This is some heavy stuff to write about, so yeah.
I think it was 2015. My oldest brother, Carlos, committed suicide. I was in my first year of law school at the time, and it was a very strange time. And at that time, I wasn't writing poetry. I've only just really recently started to be able to write about this, circumstance. For years, it was just kind of like a block. I didn't want to. It was too hard. It was too sad. I guess I needed to get, as much creative distance as one can get from, to be able to write a poem about something, I needed that. And so I wrote this poem, I think last summer. I was in a workshop with Michael Weaver, and he recommended a movie for me to watch. I think it was True Grit. And I watched that movie, and it's a very violent film. And I started thinking about my own brother's death, kind of because of this film again. And then I ended up writing this poem about it. It started off much different, the poem at first, and then it just kind of evolved into this.
I didn't know. I was a little bit hoping that you were going to tell us that you were not the speaker of that poem, that this hadn't, happened to you there, but I kind of suspected that you were working with heavy, personal material here. Was this a first dealing with that kind of stuff in your poetry? Has it like helped in the processing any? Do you think you'll go back to that kind of subject matter in more work?
Yeah, I had been trying to understand suicide and trying to understand why. There's so many questions when someone close to you does that act, and so it's a lot of questioning yourself, questioning everything, and so I began to kind of do that work. And in the midst of that, my younger brother, started kind of having the same thoughts, and so it began on this kind of double level, kind of like being in between them and just trying to understand, and kind of trying to fill in the gaps, my own gaps about understanding, the depth of that depression and that isolation and pain that they were feeling.
Yeah, thank you for reading. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, JP, do you want to hop in with the question there?
Yeah, thanks, Guy. That was really wonderful. Your epigraph, to me, draws a kind of connection between state violence and personal self-violence. I'm wondering how you went about. I mean, it's hard to not be able to sort of see it on the page. I'm wondering what kind of form you chose to also kind of embody that connection.
I mean, I could probably share my screen so y'all could see the poem, but I kind of have it. I've edited since this, and I think I put it into terse in the new one or whatever. I don't know, but I'm always tinkering with this poem. And in terms of the epigraph, that's a great question, because something that I was really thinking about was my dad kind of refuses to believe that my brother committed suicide. Like, he thinks that something happened to him, like maybe like he was murdered, but we will never know, but the argument is that Black people don't hang themselves. They don't commit suicide. And so my epigraph is kind of leaning into that space of like, just questioning that, and why certain people have certain ideas about Black people and what Black people do and what Black people don't do, so the poem is kind of circling all of those different things, and state violence is something I'm really concerned about as a Black woman, who has Black male family. It's something that is kind of an obsession, hoping that my dad will be okay or my brothers will be okay, because there are so many forces in this world that, are intent upon like destroying Black people, and so I'm just trying to explore that and to say something about it, to contribute something to the conversation about all of it.
Thank you. It's great. I actually have to hop off right now, but thank you so much. It was great to hear that.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us, JP.
Thanks,
Bye,
Dave.
JP.
Well, did anyone else have any questions for Skye fast? Well, thank you for reading that. Thank you for being here, Skye. That was great. Nathaniel, now it looks like you're up next. You ready? This is What's Inside, soon to appear in Tampa Review. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Dave, for having me. So I guess I'll just jump straight into it. This is What's Inside. Measure a city by median income, which artists lived and died there, Super Bowl wins, or what's inside its junkyard cars. In the rusted cutlass, Steelers fuzzy dice, cigarette butts scattered from the center console ashtray, pennies and dimes polka-dotted on the floor mat for turnpike drives that won't happen. The prize is spare parts. A muffler, an exhaust pipe, 2 rotting seats to get shit cars street legal, up and running again. A friend complains about Pittsburgh's potholes and how her front end needed an alignment after just one summer at the university. She asks how we deal with it. I explain the tricks to juggle hot coffee in one hand like a gyroscope, to coast over black patchwork and learn its jagged contours with 4 worn tires, to head inevitably toward a landfill of lemons and their precious metal seeds.
Cool. Thanks, Nathaniel.
Thank you.
I'll go with kind of my generic setup question. what can you tell us about this? What were you thinking when you were writing some of these images?
Yeah, so I'm a recent graduate of Penn State's BA/MA program in creative writing. Just gonna drop the program there for a sec. But
Congratulations.
I was working on my thesis this past year, really the year before that too. And it's all sort of focused on on Pittsburgh and sort of like gentrification, but also like you know, sort of the way it's like history of like steel manufacturing and different industries in the region, sort of they're involved in like environmental devastation, sort of, and sort of the way that the environmental movement, specifically in Western Pennsylvania, has been co-opted by these sort of like liberal, like like tech bro types that are like building these high rises and stuff like that. So it's a pretty tangled knot, but I'm trying to like sort of dwell in that sort of complexity. As a native Pittsburgher, like I don't really know how to feel about those issues. So when I was writing my thesis, Julia Kasdorf, my thesis advisor, was like, you need something that just has like all the ugliness in it, and so that's what I tried to do. I kind of think of this one as like the centerpiece, but yeah.
Yeah, I was hearing some complexity, some ambivalence in there.
Sure.
Good stuff. So you just graduated. Congrats. Cool.
Thank you.
Are people asking you the what's next question?
Yeah, I'm asking myself that question. Yeah, I'm sort of on the job hunt now. Just looking to, do some sort of like grant writing, trying to stay in the arts as much as possible. Thinking about doing like an MFA somewhere down the line, but kind of just need a break from school. So.
As we all nod sympathetically, right? Hear that?
Yeah.
Yup. Cool. Well, and do I understand that this is going to be one of your first publications in the world?
Yeah. Outside of like the Penn State stuff, I've also been in a couple like other undergraduate journals at other universities and stuff like that. But yeah, I also have work forthcoming in a magazine called Peace, Land, and Bread, issue 4. So if you're into that sort of thing, it's a pretty published by the Center for Communist Studies. So if that's your cup of tea.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
That's all.
Anybody have any other questions for Nathaniel while we're here?
I was really drawn to the imagery that you used, like the fuzzy dice, in particular, like sticks into it's such an image that evokes such a particular scene, like kind of scuzzy, kind of like cheap, kind of tawdry, kind of,
Sure.
I don't know. It just kind of awakens a whole scene for me. And so I wanted to ask you, like, what was your process of selecting the images that you chose for your piece?
Right. So, I mean, I wanted to, so Julia, my advisor, was like, just make it as ugly as possible. So I was going for all like the most metallic sort of stuff I could think of, which was like a junkyard with all these cars. And I think that's also like a great sort of microcosm, like for the city itself, because it's a pretty like dusty place. I love it, but it's pretty dusty. And there's just like, I don't know, it's nothing to see somebody's like broken down car in their backyard or something like that. So I was just like, it's sort of an image that I've seen, maybe not exactly with Steelers fuzzy dice, but like I remember Steelers fuzzy dice that somebody had in their broken car that they were driving around, and like, I don't know, I just wanted to throw it all in sort of to make it ugly. I don't know.
Gritty. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks a lot, Nathaniel. Glad you could be here. Let's see. Sydney, this looks like you next. Sydney Vogl. I want to write a poem about my hometown, and this is coming up in Iron Horse soon. Yeah?
Yeah, it should be soon. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Dave and Juanita and everyone who's read so far. It's been really fun to be able to hear your work. And Yeah, this is called I Want to Write a Poem About My Hometown. But it's not my hometown anymore. It's just two girls who still can't spoon their way out. A crystallized jar of honey, a man and his bruised pink anger buying milk. The man is my father, and now he's cracking pistachios in the pool. My hometown is just three boys arguing over whose hands molded better to my skin. An abandoned minivan, the clatter of empty bottles, a dirt path leading to the mouth of summer until we lose faith and turn around halfway. I try to write the poem, but I can't leave the city limits of San Francisco. My shame turns to a window and I jump. The only person I know who stayed disappeared into the heat and hasn't called in 10 years. It's loose bees in my lungs and I'm afraid to open my mouth. Someone tricked us into believing the painted desert boxes looked like home. It shrunk to the size of a watermelon and I can't bury the rind. Can't find the front door. I see it on television shows instead. Watch the mom from Weeds wander into the same coffee shop where the girl fingered herself into my heart and split down the center. Thanks.
Thanks, Sydney. So what would you like to tell us about this poem? What should we know? Yeah.
So when the pandemic hit, I was having a really hard time. I've always been a writer who has a hard time writing when I'm like in it. Like I can't write about relationships until I'm like over it. And the same with a lot of other things in my life. And so as the pandemic was hitting, I really dove into my past and tried to write about that because the present was just like so overstimulating. And so I kind of spent the last year in school. I go to University of San Francisco. I spent the last year just writing about like my adolescence and particularly like queerness in the backdrop of California. I'm from LA, but now I live in San Francisco. And my hometown is kind of a weird place because it's like where a lot of TV shows are shot. Like it's just outside of LA. So if any movie studio needs to do like a suburb shoot, then they're there. And so I'll be like watching a TV show or a movie. And then I'm like, oh, that's where, my best friend lived, or that's where like next to the street where I grew up. So it's kind of an interesting spot that I'm like always kind of pulled back into, even though I don't go back there.
Yeah. Okay. That makes me think a couple things. First of all, just like editorially, on one hand, we have the whole pandemic context and everybody's writing about that, but also like, do people want to read about this? And I'm seeing a lot of pandemic poetry and a lot of time it's just not yet, too soon, living it, don't want to read about it. So I think we're all like, writing about other times and places, at least some. So a wise person back in my MFA program said that, I can't ever really write about places while I live in them. I have to move away to get some context and write about it then. Do you feel that going on? Like you kind of had to get some distance to write about your hometown where you were?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I had a lot of stuff that I had just put into a box and then not thought about it for a while. And so this pandemic also gave me a lot of time to unpack those moments and memories and be able to like channel them in writing.
Good stuff. Any questions y'all want to ask Sydney? Anybody?
Sydney, what I really enjoyed about your poem is like, I'm from New Orleans and I've lived in LA, so I know exactly what you mean about like, seeing things on TV and being like, oh, that's where I went to like high school or something, something weird. And so, but there's always this temptation, I think, to write about the things that people already know about, like the cliche things. And what I like about your poem is that it does not do that. It resists that to give the reader a kind of new experience of a place that is so often seen and so often talked about and so often portrayed in these different ways in the media. And so my question for you is, how do you kind of sift through that, you know, when you were writing this poem or when you were crafting it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like for me, there are so many personal things about my hometown that if someone else knows about them, or if they have been in like, in the glamorized section, or like the part that everyone talks about, then it feels a bit like it's not my own moment anymore. And so then I have a hard time writing about things that don't feel intimate to me or feel like very personal. Like I wish that I could write poetry where I'm not the speaker, but unfortunately that's not really the case. And so I kind of was trying to pick moments that like really stood out as like giving the reader a glimpse into it, but knowing like the full spectrum of that moment was just like a really personal moment that I can look back on.
Thanks, Sydney. I loved your imagery. I had to write down loose bees in my lungs. I was like, writing
Thanks, I
down right
appreciate
now.
that.
Like, that's such a great, it's just so, I mean, there were so many great moments. In the end of the poem, girl fingered herself into my heart and split down the center. I mean, obsessed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Obsessed.
Yeah, well, Sydney, anything you want to tell us about what else you've got in the works? What's next for you?
Yeah, I am working on a chapbook. This is the first poem to a chapbook I'm putting together, sending out. So hopefully you guys will see that surfacing at some point. And I'm going into my thesis writing in the fall. So I'll be putting together a manuscript with that.
Good stuff. Hey, great luck with that.
Thank you.
We'll all hope to see that chapbook soon. Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Cool. Well, hey, yeah, thanks a lot, Sydney. So Cassandra, this is you up for our last reading of the evening. We have Cassandra Caverhill. This is Pandemic Haircuts, and this is also coming out from Read Magazine soon, yeah?
Correct. I think they said May, and so anytime now. Pandemic Haircuts. I'm certainly no salon apprentice, yet when I weld Norelco's Multigroom 5000, I'm adept as my mother was, standing at her station trimming, her belly big with me. That you'll submit to being my model still surprises, but you're antsy when strands fan along your neck like ghost fingers tickling. From 16 millimeter to 12 millimeter to 9, gradually I let the guard down while you sit tall in boxer briefs, eyes closed as I circle. Your tinsel patch is bigger than it was before your mom got cancer. I wipe clumps from your shoulder blades, and you say the sensations like sandpaper rubbing skin. Ask me to leave it. Somehow, I always catch the mole at your nape, hidden in your hairline, even though you tell me careful with a raw-edged razor, how easy it is to elicit pain with a button's press, to shape the bend where your head bows low. Love's greatest fallacy will always be that our safeguards won't give way. The dustpan brims with what's been shorn and swept while you shower. 2 months growth. 2 months since we drove cross country for our last chance to be with your mother in this lifetime. And I want to preserve it all. Keep your locks the way my mother keeps my childhood ponytail, secure in a Ziploc baggie, nestled in a chest with our family treasures. Thanks.
Thanks, Cassandra. Wow, I love all the imagery in there. So tactile. I could feel some of that. Yeah. Um, okay. Hey, my first question is in the title we have this set up as, pandemic haircuts, but as you're reading it, this this is about a haircut and it's about other things. How much were you thinking of this as kind of like framed by, the whole pandemic, everything we're living through, and how much is that kind of just a setting for this other deep thing that's going on, if that makes any sense?
Yeah. So it's funny because I have another poem that's about like grooming my husband. Like I trim his beard for him regularly. This is just something that like I always grew up seeing my parents do since my mom was a hairdresser, and it's like he trusted me with it. And so like I have a poem about that called Groom. So it's about the act of grooming, but him also being my husband. And so kind of like springing off of that, like since the pandemic has happened, he's allowed me to cut his hair weirdly. And I'm like, that's a lot of trust to hand that over. And so after having done it a few times, this poem kind of came to me very quickly. And that's very unusual for me when I write. Typically, I don't know what I'm writing about. I have to do a lot of digging. But this one kind of struck me with a lot of force right after having like swept up the hair and, getting ready to throw it in the garbage. All these sort of images came together. So I feel like it's a really special poem for me, given that and the fact that I'm able to kind of bring in information about like my mother and her past, and also like the losing of my mother-in-law, which happened last summer, and then just also the pandemic sort of keeping us all apart, but also sort of reminding us about like what is important right now with the people that we love. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does. I don't know if my question made sense in the first place, but I think your answer makes more sense than my question. But yeah, I love how you're pulling all that together. My other questions are getting pretty standard, but anybody else have questions for Cassandra? Anything you want to know about this piece?
I think, Cassandra, what I really enjoyed, I feel like your poem, we talk a lot about like the public and the personal in poetry. And I think something interesting that the pandemic has done is kind of like exploded what those two things mean. Suddenly the public is personal and suddenly the personal is public, because we're all at our homes, but we're like behaving as though it's like a public, it's like everything is just kind of like in flux. And so what I like about your poem is that it kind of like explores that, just kind of like this public thing, like a haircut. You go in public, get your hair done, becomes like this thing that only is able to be done in the personal world in your home. And so I was kind of wondering how you were able to like strike that balance between, both of those things in your poem, because it's just it's such an intimate poem and it's such an intimate act to cut someone's hair, that trust that you were talking about. And so I'm just curious, like, your thoughts about that.
It's a great question. I don't know that like a lot of conscious thought went into it. I would say like in general, when I write, like I am a pretty personal writer, so I like to bring a lot of that in there. I like to imbue the work with a lot of vulnerability. So that just kind of felt true to, I guess, like my aesthetic, if that makes sense. But I like that setup of public and private that you've brought up, and now that makes me wonder if like there's more to explore with that subject, because they do have like a few pandemic related poems, and that's like an aspect of it I think I hadn't considered before. So thank you for that, Jem.
Of course, it's immediately what I thought about just hearing your poem. I was like, whoa, like it's so interesting talking about pandemic poetry, because it's like either like, people are like, I don't want to read it. It's this, whatever. But I think I think if it can be done well, if it can be intimate, if it can be engaging, if it can like bridge that gap between that public and personal world, I think that, it works, and your poem clearly demonstrates that. So
Thank you.
thank you for sharing that with us.
It's been a
Hey,
joy to
Trice.
hear everyone read.
So I was just going to say, Skye, thank you for getting to the question I wanted to ask more coherently than I got to it. But yeah, when we're getting all this kind of like pandemic writing, like, gee, just kind of taking it like frontally, like, am I going to write about the pandemic? That's heavy. Do we want to write about that? Do we want to read about that? But what I love that you're doing here, Cassandra, is using this pandemic context to get at another thing here, which is cool. I'm liking the workings there. So thanks a lot. I guess one other question I'll set you up with. Anything else you want to tell us about what you're working on? What's going on? What's next for you?
So I just graduated from Bowling Green State University's MFA program. So taking a little break now after 2 years of like intense work. But I suppose I could mention I released my first chapbook last fall. It's called Mayflies, and it's kind of hard like for a book to come out in a pandemic. I didn't expect for that to happen, and I haven't really gotten to do like any promotion or anything around it. So I'll throw that out there. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Cassandra. Tell us where we can find Mayflies. Let's do the full plug here.
Sure. It's released through Finishing Line Press. I think it's available on Amazon and like Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. There's a lot of different retailers that you can order it from. So it's pretty widely available. I don't think it's widely read, but it's widely available.
It's newly out there. It will find its audience, and we will all be reading this in time. So cool. Congrats. Yeah, and you're right. It's hard to put a book out when there are no public readings and all that. That's difficult, but hey, now we have the Zoom reading. It's a thing, right? The StreamYard reading. It's a thing. Yeah, that was kind of our thought for doing this. And maybe this is an opportunity that we might not have had in the past. As far as, I don't know how many of you all are physically in the same place. I don't know how many of you all go to AWP when it's a thing. Maybe we will have live readings in Philly next year. Maybe I hope we'll be able to. But for now, it's fantastic, getting all of you together, getting everybody together, across time zones and everything here. So I guess wrapping up here, I'll just say thanks again for all of you, tuning in and reading your work.